Hi, students. Welcome to video 10. It is on the human population. So this graph shows you the human population if it were scaled based on the number of people instead of the land area. So hopefully the things that jump out to you are that China and India are very, very large because they have most of the people of the world. And then all the other places are kind of skinny because they represent, much, much fewer people. So when you finish with this video, you should be able to explain factors that affect total fertility rate in human populations. You should also be able to explain how human populations experience growth and decline, and to describe how education and family planning can help to decrease the growth rate of the human population. So a question throughout the unit that we will try to answer is is the world overpopulated? What should we be doing about it if we think that it is? So we know that our current population is 7.6 billion. We're projected to hit 9 billion by the year 2050, and then we know that we're also projected to hit 11 billion by the year 2100. So most of this growth is going to happen in developing countries, especially in Asian countries, and so something to think about is, should these countries be enacting population control laws? And some of them have. So an example of a population control law is China's one-child policy. And back in 1970, China had almost 800 million people, and they were facing starvation, plus lots of other problems. So they enacted a one-child policy, which was very successful. It reduced the number of children per woman from 5.7 down to only 1.5, so even below replacement level, which is 2. The consequences, though, ended up being that, unfortunately, in some cultures around the world, it's more preferable to have a male child, especially if you can only have one. So you ended up seeing female infanticide, which is actually the killing of baby girls. Some orphanages were basically all females in the orphanages because they were, given away by families hoping to have a boy. And then there's also a black market trade in teenage girls that's pretty prevalent because there's so few girls for every one boy. The ratio there is about 120 boys to every 100 girls. So in 2015, due to an aging population, China decided to lift its one-child policy. So now there are like some cases where couples can have 2 children because there was a concern about the labor shortages. You were not having enough young people that were going to be able to support the elderly people that were becoming a strain on the economy. So even now, there's still some imbalances between the elderly and the young people, but hopefully it will kind of jump back a little bit. So demographics is the word we use to say that we're studying the human population. And you'll see that it took us a very, very long time to reach 1 billion. We saw this in the video that we watched also. But then every billion after that, it took less and less time to get to. And the trend is going to continue as long as we're doing this exponential growth. So even if our growth rate is remaining steady, our population is still going to continue to grow because there's so many people already. Then when we look at demography, if you remember this guy, Thomas Malthus, from our history quiz, he predicted that our world would run out of food by the time we reached about 2 billion people. The problem is he did not know about the Industrial Revolution. So technology can raise the carrying capacity of the world, and so we're really not sure what the carrying capacity could be. It could be somewhere, around where we are now, or it could be 33 billion people. Now, we're probably not ever going to get to that number, but it's possible that technology could allow us to have more and more people before the carrying capacity, before we were limited by space and food and things like that. So when we look at our current and future world, the thing that you need to know from these graphs, I've highlighted around the top 3 countries for current and for the future. So you should be able to list, and this is just kind of a factoid you need to know. China is currently the most populated country. Then there's India following closely behind them, and then the United States. But look at the gap there between even the 3rd most populous country and the first 2. India and China are going to flip in the future. So India is going to be number 1, then China. The United States is staying relatively stable at number 3. So when we move towards development, all countries are going to basically have this trend. You see, most of your growth is going to be in our less developed regions, which we've talked about. And these places are areas that are, poorer, they're younger, they're rapidly growing populations. It's 80% of the world's population, which is 90% of the growth. Developed countries, on the other hand, are pretty much stable in terms of their population. Some of them are even shrinking, like Japan, and they are expected to continue declining as we move through the next century. A couple of vocabulary terms you should just know. Life expectancy. We're going to calculate our own life expectancy. This is the average age that a newborn is expected to live in that nation. The world life expectancy on average is 70 years. Infant and child mortality is looking at the number of deaths of either children under 1 or children under 5 per 1,000 live births. And that tells you a lot about the health of a nation. So here's the infant mortality rates around the world. And what you should notice here is that the African nations have very high infant mortality rates. This is also the reason why their fertility rates are still high, because if they have 8 children, maybe only 4 or 5 of them will survive into adulthood. Sometimes it's not even that many. So you notice that the African nations and some of the Asian nations are still having high infant mortality rates, which is driving their fertility rates as well. Here's the life expectancy across the world. Again, it's pretty low in some of the African nations. And so, the United States is about 76 years on average. And again, globally, it's about 70 years. So we have made huge strides over the last 50 years to get that life expectancy up almost 20 years. So we talk about some measurements of growth. How do we classify countries as developed or developing? We look at fertility rate and the total fertility rate. Fertility rate is the number of births per 1,000 women. The most likely used measurement is total fertility rate. That's the average number of children a woman is going to have in her lifetime. And that tells you a lot about the country that she comes from. So places in Africa are going to be as high as 5, maybe even 6. But then the majority of the world is around 2.5. The United States is right at replacement level fertility of being 2.1. Now, 2.1 is the replacement level because not all adults are making it into adulthood to the age where they can have children. Some of them are dying off. Some people are choosing not to have children. So that 0.1 is for those people that are dying or choosing not to have children. And again, here's our total fertility rates of the world. So just like the infant mortality rate, we see that most places that have high fertility rates are going to be in African nations. Here's the fertility rate of the United States. You'll notice that here's the replacement level fertility. This is right where we are basically now. You'll see the baby boom that happened because when people came back from the war, they were really excited to see each other. And so they ended up having quite a few babies due to that. And now the baby boomers, which is what we call them, are currently in their 70s. And so now we're causing strain on our economy because there's not as many young people as there are older people. So we're going to talk about women a little bit. So the number one thing in terms of how do you control population is educating women, providing them access to contraceptives and family planning. So that's how you drop the total fertility rate. Here's some statistics for you. In 2018, 64% of married women globally use some form of birth control, and it's different in different countries. So in China, where the fertility rate is really low, it's 86%. In the United States, we're only at about 68. And then the 20 African nations that have the highest fertility rates, it's less than 10% of the women that are actually using contraceptives. So if we can get at those nations and provide them with these services, that would increase their percent contraceptive use. So we look at some factors that affect TFR, different things that cause people to choose to have kids either later in life or to have fewer kids. So if you have better education and employment opportunities, you're going to wait to have children. If you know you're going to have a retirement program, you're not going to have as many children because you don't need them as a safety net. You're going to have that retirement plan. Infant deaths, if you know that the kids you have are going to most likely live to, their 70s, then you're going to choose to have less. Marriage age, if girls, specifically girls, get married as teenagers in some countries, then they're more likely to have kids early and to have more children. So these are all some things that you should be able to talk about, how these different factors affect TFR. So here's the effect of education. So across all cultures, all places, all countries, ethnicities, religions, everything, we see that when women are more educated, they are going to choose to have less children. Some of this is because they are spending time getting their education, and so they're not getting married as early and they're not having their first child as early. But across every one of these countries, and this is true globally, education makes fertility rates go down. So does family planning. So here you see the red is family planning countries. It is not accessible, whereas the blue countries do have family planning services. And in every single case, you have the blue being less total fertility rates because they have family planning services. We can also look at gender equity across cultures. So, in a lot of places, women lack education and they lack freedom to make decisions, not only political decisions, but also decisions about their own body. Can they take birth control or not? So, about 2/3 of the illiterate population in the world are women, and about 60% living in poverty are women. And these are some statistics from 1990. These are the percent of women representation in parliament in Asia. And then this is 2017. So we have made great progress. The concerning thing is that women are 50% of the world's population, pretty much in all countries. So we should be making up about 50% of the representation, but we're not, as you see. Same thing in the United States, House of Representatives and the Senate. Women are only accounted for about a fourth of the representation, but we make up a little bit, actually more than 50% of the United States. And if you look at Fortune 500 companies, only about 6% of CEOs are women represented in these positions. So a few statistics on women's rights. This is not anything you need to jot down, but just kind of some, wow kind of statistics in a way. And these are from 2018 even. So marital rape is legal in 10 countries. Rape is also nullified in 9 countries if the man marries the woman or girl that he rapes. So basically, the rape never happened if he marries her. In 4 of these countries, it's legal to rape a child if she is considered the man's wife, even if it's illegal to actually have child marriage in that country. In 5 countries, abortion is illegal in all cases, including the health issues of the mother or rape or incest. So if a mother knows, if doctors tell her she's definitely going to die if the pregnancy continues, there's no option but to continue that pregnancy. In 18 countries, married women cannot get a job without their husband's permission. In Saudi Arabia, women still have to have a guardian. The laws for the guardianship are not quite as strict as they used to be, but a woman still has to have permission from her guardian, who has to be a male, to study abroad, travel outside of Saudi Arabia, apply for a passport, get married, and interestingly enough, leave prison, which is kind of odd. And even in the United States, we have some issues here. So 7 states do not have any laws that make it illegal for parental rights to be obtained for a male that created a child through rape with a female. So in other words, a woman could be raped and her child is born. She decides to have the baby. And the father of that child who raped that woman would still be able to have parental rights to the child. So we have a long way to go, even though we have come a long way. So there are some positive things, but there are still some things that we need to change and work on. All right, so that's it. Bring your questions to class.